Hi everybody, welcome to the Mean and Mighty Writing Machine series, part 4. I'm Eric LaFountain. Today what I want to do is give you some questions to ask yourself as you're researching so that when you find those sources you can separate the junk from the gold. I think this is a very hard thing to do when you're faced with a big research paper. There's so much information out there. How do we make sure that we're only bringing in the gold into our papers and learning from the gold sources? How do we separate those bad sources from the good? So question number 1, is the source recent? I think we get so excited sometimes that we find a source, it seems like it's relevant to our paper, that we can overlook the publication date, and that can get us into some trouble down the road if we were to choose to paraphrase or quote it in our work. So don't forget to check the publication dates on your sources. You know, what was true 10 years ago? Well, information changes, research changes, knowledge changes, not necessarily true today. So you want to be careful not to bring in those dated sources because it really could damage the credibility of your work and make you come across as kind of a lazy and ill-informed researcher and writer. So check out those publication dates. But here's the flip side to that. I don't want you walking away today thinking, well, only the newest stuff is the best. That's not the case. And it's going to depend on your specific topic, how far back you want to go. So sometimes as a researcher, you want to deliberately find older sources. This will help you gain a more comprehensive understanding of the history surrounding your topic, and also, as related to, it will also help your readers understand the history of your topic. So sometimes it's a good idea to go back in time. And I put up an example here. Imagine if you chose to write a research paper based on the Black Lives Matter movement. You probably wouldn't want to focus only on sources published within the last few years. That would be silly. Instead, you'd likely want to go back to sources published during the civil rights era or before to gain a stronger understanding of the history behind the modern day movement, right? I don't want to just focus on the last 5 years. That's a very narrow paper, and I'm missing out on a lot. I'm not seeing how the modern day movement came to be, so to speak. So watch those publication dates. We want to make sure if it's knowledge, if it's the kind of information that can change rapidly, we want to see where that journal, what year it was published, or that book, what year it was published. But then again, depending on our topic, I may want to go back and I want to look at that older stuff, and that can really help me understand the history behind my topic. Question number 2, is the source relevant to my topic? How am I going to use this source? Is it going to help me? Am I learning something from it? Can I use it in a meaningful way? That's a big question, and I want to give you some tips on how to save time. You can't read every single article you come across. You can't read every single book you come across. You can't even go through every single website. So what do you do to save time? Let's check out number 1. Skim through the table of contents. If it's an old school book, I think this is a good way to get a feel for that book, or even an ebook, right? What's going on in the table of contents? Does it seem like how the writer's structuring his or her book? Do those parts, anything connect to my argument or to my focus? Can I use it in some way? Another good thing to do when you get into the databases and you're looking at those journals is to check out the abstract. This is that brief description of what the paper is all about. This is much better than opening up the full PDF and trying to skim and read through, 20, 25 pages, whatever the length of the paper is. The abstract is a great way. It's very concise, and it's also very clear on what you're about to get into as a reader. So when you go into the databases, before you open up the full PDF, take a look at that abstract so that you're not bogging yourself down and spending a lot of hours reading through sources that really aren't going to help you in any way. And the third thing I put up here is just based on my own personal experience as a researcher. I like to just check out the titles, whether I'm combing through the databases or just walking around the library. Sometimes the title alone will give you an idea whether the source is connected to your focus or not. And this is hit or miss. Sometimes I'll come across a title and, oh man, that looks really interesting, and I open it up and it sounds like it would be, based on the title, a really good source for the work that I'm focused on, but no, halfway through, it's totally different than I thought. But I do think it's a good first filter to just check out the titles and go from there. So hopefully that will help save you some time and make sure that you're only using sources that are really relevant to what you're trying to do. But I put a note down here. Relevant doesn't mean in agreement. And I've noticed sometimes writers in the beginning, they sometimes think, all right, here's my argument. Now I need to go out and just find sources that are in harmony with that argument. That's very dangerous. Don't do it. Just because you come across a source that doesn't align with your stance, don't dismiss it. Right? Be open to multiple perspectives rather than researching and writing with the blinders on. You want to expose yourself to those multiple voices so that you can learn what the full conversation is. You can learn more about your topic, and you may even want to bring in some of those voices that you don't agree with, because then you can respond to them and really show your readers that you're fully engaging with the conversation. You're not just playing it safe. You're not just on your own little island surrounded by like-minded people. So be open to that. Relevant doesn't mean an agreement. And also, keep these time-saving tips in mind as you're going through those databases. Question number 3, is the source reliable? As you gather sources, be sure to play detective. I think it's easier than ever to play detective this day and age, right? We have Google. So if the source is peer-reviewed, I think that's the first question, is the source peer-reviewed? You're probably going to hear your instructors say, we want only peer-reviewed sources in this paper. Focus on these first. These are the best sources. And you're probably wondering, well, if I've never heard that phrase, what does it actually mean? So peer-reviewed sources, they have to pass through a strenuous filter of qualified readers and evaluators before they make it to publication. So it's written by an expert, and then a group of peers that are also in that field have to look at that paper and make sure that it passes their bar before it finds their way to the page. So that's why it's the safest bet generally, and it's also why your instructors are probably going to encourage you to seek these types of sources out during the research process. They're the most legit, right? What about if the source isn't peer-reviewed? That's when you really need to play detective. You need to pay extra close attention to where the work was published. What is this organization? What is this company? What is this publisher all about? And what have they done and published in the past? So as you dig deeper and you find out more about the organization or the company or the publisher, do you get a sense that they have an agenda? Are they up to something? Are they trying to push out a certain message over and over again? If so, to me at least, that's when the red flag should go up. Right? Be careful. Make sure to read the work with a skeptical set of eyes, because this could be a very one-sided, wave of information coming at you. And probably a good idea to say goodbye to it. So always play detective, dig deeper, and it's very easy to do so. Like we said, you can always use Google or whatever your search engine is to find out what that source is all about. Question number 4, who is the author? And again, just like we did with our sources, we want to make sure that we're playing detective with our authors. No matter how professional or legit the individual sounds on the page or the screen, you should always ask yourself the following. What makes this individual an expert? Why am I reading this? Why am I listening to this person? Another good question, how long have they been working and researching in this field? Did they just decide that they became an expert last night and they put on a suit and they got on TV? I think sometimes, unfortunately, we see this, right? On TV, we turn on the news and whatever the topic at hand is, and we sit down and we listen to person X. We don't even know who it is, what their background is, but we just sit there and we listen, right? That's a scary thing to think about. We don't want to do it when we're reading, writers either. We want to make sure we're pushing back and we're playing detective. And then the third question I put here, is the person connected to a certain organization? Are they affiliated with a certain group? If so, is this connection potentially affecting the neutrality of her work? Were they paid a certain way, to find information that fits the agenda of whatever that organization is? Again, now the red flag goes up. So dig deeper. I also put a note here. The above questions, they don't just apply to writers. It's, I think, a good thing, a healthy thing to do, to use these questions when you're evaluating speakers as well. Who is that talking head on the nightly news? Who is that person? Why am I spending 20 minutes listening to that person talk about that topic? Who am I listening to in this YouTube video? If I'm thinking about using a YouTube video in my story, I better play detective and make sure I'm bringing in a legit outside voice. So questions like these should come as second nature to the mean and mighty writer researcher. Question number 5, how specialized is the source? So it's generally a good idea to seek out a blend. You want some specialized sources, you want some non-specialized popular sources, and I think this helps you strike a balance out in your work, in your research. So here are the pros of specialized sources. Everything you'd expect. They're written by an expert, they're detailed, they're accurate, we know we can trust them, we know we're going to learn something from them. But there's a downside as well. If we only use specialized sources, well, we need to keep in mind they probably contain jargon, very specialized language that only people in that field really understand. And if your readers don't understand that jargon and you keep quoting or paraphrasing from it, well, eventually you're going to lose a big group of your readers. So we need to make sure that we're not just relying on those really, really specialized sources over and over again. It can make the paper very difficult to understand and sometimes a little too sterile. And I gave an example here, right? Imagine if I was writing a paper about teen mothers. The information and tone that I encounter in a popular source like Cosmopolitan will be much different than the information and tone I encounter in a much more specialized source like the New England Journal of Medicine. So as a writer-researcher, I'm not favoring one over the other. Instead, I'm asking myself, how could I use both to balance my paper and engage my readers? What can I use from both? So always think about that balance, specialized versus popular, and make sure that you're striking it as a researcher and as you begin the drafting process. Question number 6, should you trust that website material? I put this up here because I know I'm guilty of this. When I get onto a website and I'm reading material, I let my guard slip, and I don't know why this happens. Maybe it's something to do with the screen or just the format, the layout. As opposed to when I'm reading a journal article or a book, I'm looking for citations. I'm very skeptical as I'm reading. I'm very careful. I want to make sure that I'm in good hands. For some reason, when I get onto a website, things just slip. So my advice to you is don't let your guard slip as you're evaluating web-based information. No matter how slick, no matter how organized the site looks, no matter how much money has been dumped into this site, ask yourself the following. Who is behind this content? Do I trust this individual? Do I trust this organization? Or does something seem off? So we'll need to play detective again. I need to go and look at what this organization's all about. The second question, is the information on the site cited? Right? Do we actually see where it came from? If they're projecting, they're putting out numbers and percentages and facts, quote and unquote facts, we better make sure that they came from somewhere, that some research has been done, so that we can verify it's not just somebody putting out nonsense. If not, if we don't get those citations, it's probably a good idea to get out of there. And the last question, has the site been updated recently, or has it been sitting around gathering dust? I think that's another good thing to look at, and a good first filter. The site has just been sitting around, nobody's doing anything or updating it. There must be a reason for that. The red flag should go up. It's time to move on. So don't let your guard slip with that website material. And hopefully now you have some better ideas on how to evaluate your sources. It can seem very overwhelming at first when you first wade into the databases, you go to the library, there's just such a mountain of information out there. Keep in mind there are ways to save time, and you also want to read everything with a skeptical set of eyes, play detective, push back against your writers, and only allow the gold into your paper. All right, thanks for sitting through Part 4 of the Mean and Mighty Writing Machine series. Part 5 will come soon.